The early morning sun peeked through the windows of Rosetta's Italian restaurant as Rita wiped down tables before the lunch rush. The warm golden light caught the dust particles floating in the air, making them dance like tiny stars above the empty dining room. She hummed softly to herself, a habit she'd picked up years ago that somehow made the monotonous work feel less lonely. "You're here early again," called a friendly voice from the kitchen doorway. It was Vince, the head chef, his apron already splattered with tomato sauce despite the early hour. "Just getting a head start," Rita replied with a small smile. Tuesday lunch crowds have been bigger lately. What most people at Rosetta's didn't know, what nobody knew really, was that Rita hadn't always been just a waitress. The truth was tucked away like an old photograph, fading at the edges but still clear in the center. Before she was carrying plates of pasta and refilling water glasses, she had been on her way to becoming a concert pianist. Life had other plans, though. Life often does. Rita had been working at Rosetta's for nearly 3 years now. She knew every crack in the tile floor, every squeak of the kitchen door, and exactly how long it took for Vince to prepare each dish on the menu. She knew which tables wobbled and needed a folded napkin under one leg. She knew which customers liked extra Parmesan and which ones would send back their soup if it wasn't steaming hot. The other servers called her the mind reader because she seemed to know what customers wanted before they asked. What looked like magic to others was simply Rita paying attention. Watching people was something she'd always been good at, even back when she sat at a piano bench instead of counting tips at the end of a shift. The grand piano in the corner of the dining room was mostly for show. It was a beautiful instrument, polished black wood that gleamed under the chandelier lights, brass pedals that caught the candlelight during dinner service. Occasionally, the restaurant owner would hire a pianist for special events, but most days it sat untouched, collecting fingerprints from curious children who would press a key or two while their parents weren't looking. Rita never touched it, not even once in 3 years. "You know, I've always wondered why Mr. Donnelly keeps that thing," Vince said, nodding toward the piano as he helped Rita arrange the chairs. "Takes up space we could use for another four-top. And it's not like he pays for tuning." Rita just shrugged. "Atmosphere, I guess. People like fancy things even if they don't use them." By noon, the restaurant was half full with the usual Tuesday crowd. Business people on lunch breaks, a few elderly couples who came in weekly for the senior special, and the book club that always took the big table by the window. Rita moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing plates along her arm, remembering who wanted no onions and who needed extra napkins. "Rita, honey, how's your grandmother doing?" asked Mrs. Winters, a regular who always ordered the minestrone soup and house salad, dressing on the side. "She's doing better. Thank you for asking," Rita answered, refilling the woman's water glass. "The new medication seems to be helping with her pain." Rita's grandmother was the reason she was here after all. 3 years ago, when Gran fell and broke her hip, the medical bills had started piling up. With no health insurance and a fixed income that barely covered rent, Rita had made the choice that didn't feel like a choice at all. She withdrew from the music conservatory, moved back to her hometown, and took the first job she could find. Sometimes, during quiet moments like this morning, she'd wonder what her life would have been if things had gone differently. If she'd stayed at school, finished her degree, maybe gone on to play in orchestras or teach at a university. But those thoughts never lasted long. They couldn't change anything, and Rita wasn't the type to dwell on might-have-beens. "Order up," Vince called from the kitchen window, and Rita was grateful for the interruption to her thoughts. The lunch rush kept her busy enough that she didn't have time to think about anything except getting the right orders to the right tables with a smile that, even on her tired days, never felt completely fake. She genuinely liked most of the customers, and there was a simple satisfaction in doing a job well, even if it wasn't the job she had once dreamed of. By mid-afternoon, the restaurant had emptied out again. Rita was wiping down menus when Mr. Donnelly, the owner, came in through the front door. He wasn't usually around this time of day, preferring to handle the evening service when the restaurant made most of its money. "Rita, just the person I wanted to see," he said, his booming voice filling the quiet space. He was a large man with a larger personality, hands always moving when he talked, his Italian accent getting stronger when he was excited about something. "Everything okay, Mr. Donnelly?" she asked, setting the menus aside. "Better than okay. I just got off the phone with the Harrises. They're booking the whole restaurant for their grandmother's 80th birthday next Friday night. Big party, 50 people at least. Rita nodded, already mentally calculating how many servers they would need and which tables would have to be rearranged. "They're paying extra for the pianist, too," Mr. Donnelly continued. "The grandmother was a piano teacher for 50 years, apparently. They want nice classical music during dinner." "That sounds lovely," Rita said. "I'll make sure the piano area is cleaned up before then." "Good, good. And I'm putting you in charge of the whole service. You're my best, you know that." After Mr. Donnelly left, Rita found herself standing in front of the piano. She ran a finger along its dusty lid, leaving a clean line behind. She hadn't touched a piano in 3 years, not since the day she'd packed up her dorm room at the conservatory, leaving behind sheet music and dreams in equal measure. For a brief moment, her fingers itched to lift the cover, to press down on the keys, to see if they would still respond to her touch the way they used to. Instead, she grabbed a dust cloth from under the bar and began wiping down the piano's surface, erasing any evidence of her fingerprints along with the dust. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Extra staff was scheduled, the menu was set with the family, and the dining room was arranged to accommodate the large party. Rita coordinated it all with her usual efficiency, making lists and checking them twice, ensuring nothing would be left to chance. The pianist, a serious young man named Leo who sometimes played weekend gigs at Rosetta's, confirmed that he would arrive an hour before the party to set up. Rita made a note to have the piano tuned before, then something Mr. Donnelly had agreed to after she pointed out how embarrassing it would be to have an out-of-tune instrument for a former piano teacher's birthday. Everything was going according to plan until Thursday afternoon, when Rita's phone rang while she was folding laundry at home. "Hello? Rita, it's Mr. Donnelly." His voice sounded strained. "We have a problem with tomorrow's party." Rita sat down on the edge of her bed. "What kind of problem?" "The pianist just called. He's got some kind of stomach bug, been throwing up all day. Says there's no way he can play tomorrow." Rita's heart sank. "Have you tried calling anyone else? On a Friday night? With less than 24 hours notice?" Mr. Donnelly sighed heavily into the phone. "I've called 3 people already. Everyone's booked." Rita closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what she was about to say before the words even formed. Her throat felt tight, like her body was trying to stop the words from coming out. "Mr. Donnelly," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "I might know someone who could help." "Really, who?" "Anyone decent at this point, Rita. The family specifically requested piano music. It was the grandmother's one request." Rita took a deep breath. "Me," she said. "I used to play. Before I started working at Rosetta's, I was studying piano performance at Westridge Conservatory." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You?" Mr. Donnelly finally said, his voice a mix of surprise and hope. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "We have a piano right there in the restaurant." Rita twisted the phone cord around her finger, an old nervous habit from childhood. "It's complicated. I haven't played in a long time, and I'm not sure if I still can. But if you can't find anyone else, I could try. Can you come in early tomorrow? Play a little, see how it goes?" "Yes," she said, already feeling a flutter of panic in her chest. "I can do that." After hanging up, Rita sat motionless on her bed, staring at her hands. They were good hands for a pianist, long fingers strong from years of practice and now from carrying heavy trays. There were calluses that hadn't been there 3 years ago, small burns from hot plates, a paper cut on her thumb from folding menus. Could these hands still create music? Or had that part of her withered away from disuse like a garden left untended? She'd find out tomorrow, it seemed. For now, she had sheet music to dig out of boxes long untouched, and a grandmother to call with news that might make the old woman cry with joy. Because if there was one person who had been more heartbroken than Rita about her leaving music school, it was Gran, who had sacrificed so much to get her there in the first place. Friday morning arrived with a knot of anxiety in Rita's stomach that no amount of coffee seemed to wash away. She had been up most of the night, fingers moving across her kitchen table as if it were a keyboard, muscle memory slowly awakening as she practiced pieces she once knew by heart. Rita arrived at Rosetta's 2 hours before her shift was scheduled to begin. The restaurant was empty except for Vince, who was already prepping sauces in the kitchen, and Mr. Donnelly, who waited by the piano with an expectant look on his face. "You really think you can do this?" he asked as Rita set down her bag. There was no judgment in his voice, just honest concern. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's why I'm here early." Mr. Donnelly nodded and stepped away from the piano. "I'll be in my office. Take all the time you need. Rita stood in front of the instrument, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The piano had been tuned yesterday afternoon. Its lid now propped open to reveal the complex inner workings, strings and hammers that would respond to her touch if she could remember how to ask them. She sat down slowly on the bench, adjusting its height, her body remembering this ritual from thousands of practice sessions. The keys looked impossibly white, impossibly clean. Rita placed her hands above them, hovering, not yet making contact. Just do it, she whispered to herself. Her fingers descended, pressing into a simple C major chord. The sound resonated through the empty restaurant, clear and true. She played another chord, then another, her hands remembering their old patterns like returning to a childhood home. There were mistakes, fingers hitting wrong notes, timing slightly off, but underneath the rust was a foundation still solid. She began to play a piece she'd learned in her first year at the conservatory, a relatively simple Chopin prelude. By the third measure, tears were streaming down her face, but her hands kept moving, kept finding the notes. It wasn't perfect, not by the standards she once held herself to, but it was music, real music, flowing from her hands after 3 years of silence. "Holy smokes," came a voice from the kitchen doorway. Rita's hands froze mid-phrase, and she turned to see Vince staring at her with his mouth open, a wooden spoon dripping sauce onto the floor. "You never said you could play like that," he said. I couldn't, I didn't anymore." Rita wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I used to, though." Mr. Donnelly appeared behind Vince, his face split into a wide grin. "I think we found our pianist for tonight," he announced. For the next hour, Rita played through the pieces she remembered best, making notes of what she would need to practice before the evening's performance. Her fingers grew more confident with each passing minute, though they tired more quickly than they used to. When she finally stood up from the bench, her back ached and her wrists felt stiff, but there was a lightness in her chest that had been absent for a long time. "I'll need to go home and practice more," she told Mr. Donnelly. "And I'll have to borrow some sheet music from the library for a few pieces I'm not sure I remember completely." "Whatever you need," he said. "Just be back by 5 to help set up for the party." The rest of the morning passed in a blur as Rita helped prepare the restaurant while her mind was elsewhere, running through chord progressions and tricky passages she would need to navigate that evening. The other servers noticed her distraction but attributed it to the stress of managing the big event. "You okay?" asked Theo, one of the busboys, when Rita nearly walked into him while carrying a stack of napkins. "You seem like you're on another planet today." "I'm fine," she said, managing a smile. "Just a lot to think about with this party tonight." If only they knew what was really occupying her thoughts. For 3 years, Rita had been careful to keep her past separate from her present. Nobody at Rosetta's knew about the music scholarships, the competitions she'd won, the dreams she'd set aside. It had been easier that way to be just Rita, the reliable waitress, not Rita, the pianist who had given up. But tonight, those two worlds would collide, and she wasn't sure she was ready. By the time Rita returned to the restaurant at 5, the dining room had been transformed. Tables were arranged in a U-shape around a central area where the birthday woman would sit. White tablecloths covered every surface, and tiny votive candles in glass holders created a warm, flickering glow. Fresh flowers, mostly lilies and roses and soft pinks and whites, filled small vases at each place setting. The piano had been moved slightly to create better sight lines from the main table. Someone had polished it until it gleamed, reflecting the overhead lights like a mirror. Rita approached it with reverence, setting her folder of sheet music on the stand. "The family's arriving at 6:30, Mr. Donnelly told her, straightening his tie nervously. "The guest of honor comes at 7. You'll play background music during drinks, then dinner, and they want something special when they bring out the cake." Rita nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. "And Rita," he added, placing a hand on her shoulder, "thank you for doing this. I know it can't be easy." She gave him a tight smile and sat down at the piano to arrange her music, while the rest of the staff bustled around, lighting candles and folding napkins into fancy shapes. Rita closed her eyes for a moment, trying to center herself, to remember what it felt like to perform without panic taking over. The family began arriving right on schedule. They were a loud, cheerful group that quickly filled the restaurant with chatter and laughter. Rita began playing softly as they settled in, choosing gentle classical pieces that wouldn't compete with conversation. Most people didn't even notice the music at first. which was exactly as it should be for this part of the evening. Rita kept her head down, focusing on the keys, not ready to be recognized as the person who usually brought their food. A few regulars did double takes when they saw her, but most guests were strangers who had no idea that the person playing Debussy's Clair de Lune was normally carrying trays of pasta and refilling wine glasses. At precisely 7 o'clock, there was a commotion at the entrance. Rita glanced up to see an elderly woman being escorted in, her white hair styled elegantly, a corsage pinned to her blue dress. This must be the guest of honor, the piano teacher celebrating her 80th birthday. The whole room burst into a chorus of happy birthday, and Rita smoothly transitioned her playing to accompany them, adding harmonies beneath their somewhat off-key singing. The elderly woman beamed, clearly touched by the outpouring of love. As the party settled in for dinner, Rita continued playing, moving from one piece to the next. Her initial nervousness had faded, replaced by a growing confidence. Her fingers remembered more than she had given them credit for, finding patterns and expressions she had thought were lost to time. About halfway through the main course, Rita noticed Mr. Donnelly approaching the piano with a worried expression. "There's a small problem," he whispered when he reached her. "The family wants to say something about their grandmother's history as a piano teacher, and they were hoping the pianist could play one of her favorite pieces afterward. They just told me it's Chopin's Nocturne No. 2 in E-flat major." Rita's hands faltered on the keys. The Nocturne was a challenging piece, one she had performed years ago but hadn't practiced since leaving school. "Do you know it?" Mr. Donnelly asked hopefully. Rita hesitated. "I used to. It's been a long time, though, and I don't have the sheet music for it. Can you try? They're making such a big deal about it being her favorite. I told them our regular pianist is sick and we have a last-minute replacement, but they seemed really set on this piece." Rita took a deep breath. "I'll try," she said finally. "I can't promise it will be perfect." Mr. Donnelly squeezed her shoulder gratefully and went to inform the family. Rita continued playing while her mind frantically searched for memories of the Nocturne. She could recall the opening measures clearly, and the main theme, but there were sections in the middle that were hazy. Still, she had no choice now but to try. A man at the head table stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. Rita brought her current piece to a gentle close and rested her hands in her lap. "Listening. Before we bring out the cake," the man announced, "we wanted to say a few words about our guest of honor, my mother, Eliza Burton." He spoke warmly about his mother's 50 years as a piano teacher, how she had touched hundreds of young lives with her patience and passion for music. He told stories of students who had gone on to become professional musicians, of recitals organized in nursing homes, of the battered upright piano in their living room that had been the center of family life. "Mom always said that music was a gift we give to others," he concluded, raising his glass. "Tonight, in honor of her birthday, we've asked the pianist to play her favorite piece, Chopin's Nocturne No. 2. All eyes turned to Rita, including those of the elderly teacher. There was no backing out now. Rita straightened her posture, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes flowed from her fingers more easily than she had expected, muscle memory taking over where conscious recall failed. The Nocturne's sweet singing melody filled the restaurant, and Rita felt herself being transported back to a time when music was her whole world, when these keys beneath her fingers were as familiar as her own heartbeat. She hit a wrong note in the middle section but recovered quickly, pushing forward with growing confidence. When she reached the final gentle chords, there was complete silence in the room. No clinking glasses, no whispered conversations. Everyone was listening. As the last note faded, Rita looked up to see the elderly teacher with tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed to her heart. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, something passed between them, a recognition, a shared understanding of what it meant to love music enough to give your life to it. And then the room erupted in applause. The applause seemed to go on forever. Rita sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. She had almost forgotten what it felt like, the rush of completing a difficult piece, the connection with an audience, the strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that came after a performance. When the clapping finally died down, Rita noticed that several people were wiping away tears, including the birthday woman herself. The elderly piano teacher was looking directly at her with an expression of wonder. as if she had just witnessed something miraculous rather than just a rusty performance of a piece she had probably heard thousands of times. "That was beautiful," Mr. Donnelly whispered, appearing suddenly at Rita's side. "I had no idea you could play like that." Rita managed a shaky smile. "Neither did I, to be honest. Take a 5-minute break if you need it," he said. "Then maybe something a little lighter while they serve the cake?" Rita nodded, grateful for the chance to collect herself. She stood up from the bench on legs that felt oddly unsteady and made her way to the small employee break room at the back of the restaurant. She needed a moment alone, away from the curious stares and the whispers that had broken out among the staff. In the quiet of the break room, Rita splashed cold water on her face and took several deep breaths. Her hands were trembling slightly, from adrenaline, from emotion, from the physical strain of playing after so long. She flexed her fingers, wincing at the stiffness in her joints. "Excuse me?" Rita turned to find a young woman standing in the doorway. She recognized her as one of the birthday party guests, a granddaughter perhaps. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said. "My grandmother wants to know if she could speak with you for a moment?" Rita hesitated. She wasn't ready for questions about her background, about why someone who could play Chopin was serving pasta instead of performing in concert halls. But she couldn't refuse the birthday woman's request. "Of course," she said, drying her hands on a paper towel. "I'll be right there." The elderly piano teacher was seated at the head of the main table, a half-eaten slice of cake in front of her. Despite her age, she sat with perfect posture, shoulders back, chin lifted, the unmistakable bearing of a musician who had spent decades correcting the slumped shoulders of students. "Grandmother." "This is the pianist," the young woman said, guiding Rita forward. Up close, Rita could see that the teacher's eyes were a clear, bright blue, alert and intelligent. Those eyes studied Rita with interest as she extended a hand. "Eliza Burton," she said, her voice stronger than her fragile appearance might suggest. "That was quite a performance, my dear." "Thank you," Rita replied, shaking the offered hand. "I'm Rita Alvarez." "Rita!" Eliza repeated, still holding onto her hand. "Tell me, where did you study? Your technique has elements of the Russian school, but with an expressiveness that reminds me of the French tradition." Rita felt heat rising to her cheeks. This woman could read her playing like a book, hearing all the influences of her various teachers. "Westridge Conservatory," she admitted, "for 3 years. But I didn't graduate." Something flickered in Eliza's eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "Alvarez," she murmured. "About 3 years ago? Wait, were you the student who won the Marlowe competition with the Rachmaninoff concerto?" Rita's mouth fell open in surprise. "You know about that?" Eliza laughed, a warm, delighted sound. "My dear, I may be 80 years old, but I still follow the competition circuit. You were extraordinary that night. The music world was buzzing about you, and then you just disappeared." By now, several family members had gathered around them, listening with curious expressions. Rita was painfully aware that some of the restaurant staff were also hovering nearby, including Theo and Vince, whose shocked faces made it clear they were hearing all of this for the first time. "Life happened," Rita said simply, not ready to share the full story with an audience. "Family responsibilities." Eliza nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Life does have a way of rearranging our plans," she said. "But talent like yours doesn't just vanish. It waits like a seed underground, ready to bloom when conditions are right again." She gestured to the piano. "Will you play something else for us? Something you love?" Rita looked over at the instrument that had been both her closest friend and her most demanding taskmaster for so much of her life. The thought of playing again, of really playing, not just background music but something meaningful, made her heart race. "I think I would like that," she said. As Rita walked back to the piano, she was aware of the entire restaurant watching her. Word had spread among the regular diners about the waitress who could play like a concert pianist, and even people from other sections had gathered around the perimeter of the party area. Rita sat down at the bench and took a moment to consider what to play. Without sheet music, she was limited to pieces she had memorized years ago, ones that might still be hiding in her muscle memory. After a brief hesitation, she began the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The haunting triplets flowed from her fingers, filling the restaurant with their somber beauty. Rita closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the music completely. This wasn't background music for diners to talk over. This was a performance, and the restaurant had transformed into a concert hall. She played with a freedom she had rarely experienced even during her conservatory days, when she had been so focused on technical perfection that she sometimes lost the emotional core of the music. Now, with years of life experience between her and those days of intense training, she found new depths in the familiar notes. When the final chords faded, there was a moment of profound silence before the applause began. Rita opened her eyes to see that more people had gathered. Kitchen staff in their white coats, customers who had been seated in the bar area, even a couple of people who appeared to have wandered in from the street, drawn by the music spilling out the open windows. Mr. Donnelly was standing by the door with a strange expression on his face, part pride, part calculation. The birthday woman, Eliza, was beaming at her from the head table, nodding in approval. What happened next was something Rita could never have predicted. A man stepped forward from the crowd, holding up his phone. "I just posted a video of you playing the Chopin to my Instagram," he said. "It's already getting shared like crazy. People are asking who you are." Rita stared at him, not quite comprehending. "A video of me? Hope that's okay," he said, looking suddenly uncertain. "It was just so unexpected, you know? A waitress sitting down at the piano and playing like a professional. People love that kind of story." Before Rita could respond, another guest chimed in. "I put it on TikTok, too. My daughter's a piano student, and I wanted her to see it. She says you're amazing." The reality of what was happening began to sink in. In the age of social media, nothing stayed local for long. What had been a private moment of reconnection with her past was now being broadcast to the world. Rita looked to Mr. Donnelly in panic, but he was deep in conversation with one of the birthday party guests, gesturing enthusiastically toward the piano. "Rita," called a voice, and she turned to see Vince approaching with a glass of water. He handed it to her with a sympathetic smile. "You look like you could use this." "Thanks," she said, taking a grateful sip. "This is all happening so fast. Why didn't you ever tell us?" he asked, the question that had clearly been on his mind since he first heard her play that morning. "All this time you could have been playing here, not just serving food." Rita traced a finger along the edge of the glass, trying to find the words to explain. "It was easier to keep those worlds separate," she said finally. "Playing reminded me of what I gave up, and I wasn't sure I could do it anymore, not the way I used to." Vince shook his head in amazement. "Well, you can. Anyone with ears can tell that." The party continued around them, but now with a different energy. People kept glancing at Rita, some taking not-so-subtle photos with their phones. The birthday woman's family members took turns approaching her, asking questions about her training, complimenting her playing, one even inquiring if she gave lessons. By the time the party began to wind down, Rita felt both emotionally drained and oddly invigorated. She had played several more pieces at Eliza's request, each one coming back to her fingers more easily than the last. It was as if a door had been unlocked inside her, releasing a flood of music that had been dammed up for 3 years. As the last guests were preparing to leave, Eliza made her way over to the piano once more. She sat down beside Rita on the bench, her thin shoulders straight despite the late hour. "You have a rare gift," the elderly teacher said without preamble. "It would be a tragedy to let it go to waste." Rita looked down at her hands, server's hands now, calloused in different places than a pianist's would be. "I'm not sure I can go back to that life," she admitted. "My grandmother needs me. The medical bills." Eliza placed her own hand over Rita's, the hands of a fellow pianist marked by decades of dedication to the same craft. "There are always obstacles," she said gently. "Always reasons to give up on dreams. I've seen hundreds of talented students walk away from music for all sorts of valid reasons." She paused, her blue eyes intense. "But I've also seen those who find a way forward despite the obstacles. Those are the ones who leave a mark on the world." She pressed a small card into Rita's palm. "My studio is always open to you, whether you want to practice, perform, or even teach. Music finds a way, Rita, if you let it." As Eliza rose to join her waiting family, Rita remained at the piano, the card clutched in her hand, her mind spinning with possibilities that had seemed unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. Something had changed tonight, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed her playing. The videos spreading across social media ensured that what had happened in this small Italian restaurant wouldn't stay contained within these walls. Rita didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in 3 years she was eager to find out. Rita woke the next morning to her phone buzzing nonstop. Squinting at the screen, she saw dozens of notifications from social media apps she rarely used anymore. There were also several missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize and a text from Mr. Donnelly that simply read, "Call me when you wake up." Big news. Sitting up in bed, Rita ran a hand through her tangled hair, trying to make sense of what was happening. The events of the previous night came rushing back. The piano, the applause, Eliza Burton's words, and the people recording her performance. She hadn't expected it to spread beyond the restaurant so quickly. With a deep breath, she opened one of the social media apps. A video titled "Waitress Stuns Birthday Party with Incredible Piano Skills" had been viewed over 50,000 times. The comment section was filled with people expressing amazement, asking who she was, and wondering why she was working as a waitress with such talent. "Goodness," she whispered to herself. Before she could explore further, her phone rang. It was her grandmother. "Rita, honey," came the familiar voice, tinged with excitement. "Mrs. Lopez next door just showed me a video of you playing piano at that restaurant. Why didn't you tell me you were performing again?" Rita sighed, settling back against her pillows. "It wasn't planned, Gran. The regular pianist got sick and they needed someone for a birthday party. I was just helping out." "Well, you looked wonderful." "Just like old times." There was a pause. "How did it feel? To play again?" That was the question Rita had been asking herself all night as she tossed and turned, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. "It felt right," she admitted. "Like finding something I didn't know I'd lost." Her grandmother made a soft sound of understanding. "I've kept your old sheet music, you know. It's in boxes in the spare room. Never had the heart to throw it away." After promising to visit later that day, Rita ended the call and reluctantly dialed Mr. Donnelly's number. "There you are," he exclaimed when he answered. "Have you seen what's happening online?" "A little," Rita said cautiously. "I just woke up. The videos of you playing have gone viral. Local news stations are calling the restaurant asking about you. And that's not all. A woman from the Parker Music Academy called this morning. They want to offer you a position teaching piano." Rita nearly dropped her phone. The Parker Academy was one of the most prestigious music schools in the city, known for employing top-tier musicians as instructors. What?" she stammered. "Teaching position," Mr. Donnelly repeated. "Apparently the director is friends with that birthday lady, Eliza something, who recommended you personally. They want you to call them back today." Rita's mind raced. A teaching position would mean steady income doing something related to her passion, rather than serving food. But it would also mean admitting to herself that her dreams of being a performer were truly over, that she was shifting from being an artist to teaching others to be artists instead. "There's more," Mr. Donnelly continued, not waiting for her response. "The local morning show wants to interview you. Human interest story, they said. The waitress with the hidden talent. And I've had 3 people call asking if you'll be playing at the restaurant again. I told them I'd have to check with you, but Rita," his voice grew earnest, "this could be huge for the restaurant. And for you." By the time Rita arrived at Rosetta's for her afternoon shift, the word had spread among the entire staff. Theo greeted her with a dramatic bow, and Vince emerged from the kitchen to give her a bear hug that left flower handprints on her shirt. "Our very own celebrity," Vince said with a grin. "Next time I need a day off, I'm telling everyone I used to be a famous chef who cooked for the Queen of England." Rita laughed, grateful for his attempt to lighten the mood. "I was never famous," she corrected him. "Just a student with potential." "Well, you're internet famous now," Theo said, showing her his phone where another video of her playing had racked up comments. "My sister's a music major at State, and her professor showed your video in class this morning as an example of genuine musical expression or something." Throughout her shift, customers kept stealing glances at her, some bold enough to ask if she was the piano girl from the video. A few even requested autographs on their napkins, which made Rita blush furiously. Mr. Donnelly had moved the piano slightly, positioning it so it was more visible from all areas of the restaurant. The implication was clear. He hoped this wouldn't be a one-time event. As Rita delivered a plate of linguine to a table by the window, the customer looked up at her with wide eyes. "It is you," the woman exclaimed. "My daughter showed me that video this morning. Would you consider playing something for us today? Just one song?" Rita glanced at Mr. Donnelly, who was watching the exchange from across the room. He gave her an encouraging nod. "Maybe at the end of my shift," Rita said, surprising herself with the answer. Around 8 o'clock, word spread quickly. By 7:30, every table in the restaurant was filled, with a waiting list growing by the minute. People were ordering extra desserts and coffee, lingering over their meals in anticipation. Mr. Donnelly was practically dancing behind the host stand, delighted by the unexpected boom in business. At 8 o'clock, Rita hung up her apron, washed her hands, and made her way to the piano. The restaurant fell silent as she sat down on the bench, all eyes following her movements. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm still getting used to this attention, so please bear with me." She began with a gentle Beethoven bagatelle, something simple to warm up her fingers. From there, she moved into more challenging pieces, gaining confidence with each note. Unlike the night before, when she had been caught off guard, tonight she was prepared, ready to share this part of herself that had been hidden for so long. As she played the final chords of a Schubert impromptu, the restaurant erupted in applause. Rita stood and gave a small bow, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Mr. Donnelly approached with a glass of champagne. "Two new beginnings," he said, handing it to her with a flourish. Later that night, after the restaurant had closed and the staff had gone home, Rita sat alone at the piano, idly playing fragments of melodies as she thought about the day's events. Her phone lay on top of the piano, open to an email from the Parker Music Academy outlining their offer. A part-time teaching position with flexible hours, decent pay, and access to their practice rooms. Next to her phone was a business card from a local news reporter and a note from Eliza Burton, with her home phone number and an invitation to tea the following week. So many possibilities, so many paths suddenly opening before her. It was overwhelming after 3 years of having just one focus: survival. The back door opened, and Vince appeared, surprising Rita. She thought everyone had left. "Forgot my good knife," he explained, holding up a chef's knife in a leather case. He paused, studying her face. "Heavy thoughts?" Rita nodded, grateful for the perceptive question. "Life can change so fast," she said. "Yesterday I was just a waitress. Today I'm fielding job offers and interview requests." Vince pulled up a chair and sat down, setting his knife on a nearby table. "Can I ask you something? Why did you really stop playing? Was it just because of your grandmother's medical bills, or was there more to it?" The question caught Rita off guard. She'd grown so used to giving the simplified version of her story, family obligations, financial necessity, that she rarely acknowledged the deeper truths. Even to herself, "It wasn't just the money," she admitted after a long pause. "I was burning out. The pressure at the conservatory was intense. Every performance was judged, every mistake analyzed. The joy was getting squeezed out of the music." She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing down enough to make a sound. "When my grandmother got hurt, it was a reason to step away that nobody could argue with." "Including me?" Vince nodded thoughtfully. "And now? Is the joy back?" Rita considered this. The performances over the past 2 days had been different from anything she'd experienced at school. No judges with scorecards, no teachers marking technical errors, just people connecting with the music she created. "I think it is," she said, a small smile forming. "But it's different now, more mine somehow." "Well," Vince said, standing up and retrieving his knife, "for what it's worth, I think you should keep playing, but maybe don't quit your day job just yet." He grinned. "Who will bring me coffee during the lunch rush if you leave?" After Vince left, Rita remained at the piano, her fingers finding their way to a piece she had composed years ago but never finished. The melody came back to her easily, but now she could hear how it should continue. The next phrases unfolding naturally where once there had been a creative block. Her phone buzzed with yet another notification, but Rita ignored it, lost in the process of creation. The restaurant was dark except for the small light above the piano, the empty tables like silent spectators as new music filled the space. For the first time in years, Rita felt like herself again, not just the reliable waitress or the former piano student, but a complete person with a voice that deserved to be heard. Outside the restaurant, a light rain began to fall, droplets racing down the windows like nature's own music. Inside, Rita played on, adding her melody to the rhythm of the rain. Each note a step on a path that was neither a return to her past nor a continuation of her present, but something new altogether, a path uniquely her own. 6 months had passed since the night Rita's hidden talent was revealed to the world. Half a year of changes, challenges, and unexpected joys that had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Rosetta's as Rita arranged fresh flowers on the piano. The restaurant wouldn't open for another hour, but she liked to arrive early on performance days to prepare both the space and herself. Yes, performance days. What had begun as a one-time emergency fill-in had evolved into a regular Friday night tradition. Piano night with Rita had become so popular that Mr. Donnelly now required reservations a week in advance, with a waiting list that sometimes stretched to 30 names. "Morning," called Vince as he pushed through the kitchen doors, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. "Made you the good stuff. Figured you might need it after your late night." Rita accepted the mug gratefully. "Thanks." The recital went longer than I expected. The recital he referred to was the seasonal showcase at Parker Music Academy, where Rita now taught piano 3 afternoons a week. Her students had performed wonderfully, particularly 8-year-old Lily, whose tiny fingers had tackled a challenging Mozart piece with impressive precision. "How's the grandmother?" Vince asked, wiping down the bar. "Much better," Rita smiled. "The physical therapy is working wonders. She's even talking about volunteering at the community center again." This was perhaps the most meaningful change of all. With Rita's combined income from teaching and her reduced hours at Rosetta's, now primarily as a pianist rather than a server, they had been able to afford better medical care for Gran. The improvement in her health had been remarkable. The kitchen doors swung open again as Theo arrived, followed by 2 new servers Rita had helped train. The restaurant staff had expanded along with its popularity, another unexpected ripple effect from that fateful night. "Mail came early," Theo said, dropping a small stack of envelopes on the piano. "Couple more fan letters for you." Rita rolled her eyes at the term but couldn't help feeling touched. Ever since the local news segment about her had aired, people from around the city and sometimes beyond had been sending notes of appreciation. Many shared stories about their own abandoned dreams and how her story had inspired them to revisit old passions. As Rita sorted through the envelopes, a thick cream-colored one caught her eye. The return address made her heart skip a beat. Westridge Conservatory. With slightly trembling fingers, she opened it and began to read. "Dear Ms. Alvarez," it began formally. "It has come to our attention through recent media coverage and the personal recommendation of Eliza Burton that you have returned to performing music after a 3-year hiatus." The letter went on to invite Rita to apply for a special program designed for exceptional mature students who wish to complete their education. A scholarship covering 75% of tuition was being offered, with a flexible schedule that would allow her to maintain her current teaching and performance commitments. "Everything okay?" Vince asked, noticing her expression. "I'm not sure," Rita said honestly, passing him the letter. "This is unexpected." As Vince read, Mr. Donnelly arrived, bringing with him his usual whirlwind of energy and ideas. He had embraced Rita's musical career with enthusiastic support, constantly finding new ways to promote both her and the restaurant. "Rita, just the person I wanted to see," he called across the room. "I've been thinking, what if we did a special Sunday brunch concert once a month? More classical, maybe some chamber music if you know other musicians who might be interested." Before Rita could respond, Vince handed the letter to Mr. Donnelly. "She might be a bit busy for that." Mr. Donnelly's expression changed as he read, eyebrows rising higher with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Rita with a complex mix of emotions: pride, worry, and something that might have been disappointment. "This is a wonderful opportunity," he said finally. "Though of course we would miss you terribly if you went back to school full-time." "I haven't decided anything," Rita assured him quickly. "And the letter mentions a flexible schedule. I wouldn't have to leave Rosetta's." The truth was more complicated than she could express. Returning to the conservatory meant facing the world she had walked away from, the crushing pressure and competition that had once drained the joy from her music. But it also meant a chance to finish what she had started, to fully develop her skills under expert guidance, to see what she might truly be capable of. The restaurant began to fill with the rest of the staff preparing for the day, and Rita tucked the letter into her bag, promising herself she would think about it later. For now, there were tables to arrange, menus to check, and a new piece to practice for that evening's performance. The morning passed quickly, and before she knew it, the lunch crowd had arrived. Though Rita no longer served as a waitress for most shifts, she still helped out during particularly busy times. There was something comforting about the familiar rhythm of taking orders and delivering food, a grounding counterpoint to the more emotional experience of performing. As she delivered a plate of spaghetti to a table near the window, she recognized the customer, Professor Chen from the music department at State University. He had come to several of her Friday performances and always requested classical pieces from the Romantic era. "Rita," he greeted her with a warm smile, "just the person I hoped to see. I have a proposition for you." Rita sat down, his food, and raised an eyebrow questioningly. "The university's community outreach program is launching a new initiative, bringing music education to underserved neighborhoods. We need instructors willing to teach beginners, both children and adults who wouldn't otherwise have access to music lessons." He paused. "Your story has resonated with many people. You bridge worlds that don't often connect. Would you consider being part of this program?" It was the third opportunity presented to her in a single day, each pulling her in a slightly different direction. Rita promised to think about it and returned to her duties, her mind swirling with possibilities. By the time evening came and the restaurant transformed for dinner service, Rita felt the weight of decisions pressing on her. As she sat at the piano, adjusting the bench and arranging her music, she wondered if she was capable of making the right choice. The restaurant was packed, as it was every Friday night. Regular customers mixed with newcomers, all there to hear the waitress who had become known throughout the city for her exceptional playing. Rita scanned the crowd and spotted her grandmother sitting at her usual table near the piano, looking healthier and happier than she had in years. Next to Gran sat Eliza Burton, who had become both a friend and mentor over the past months. The elderly piano teacher had been instrumental in connecting Rita with teaching opportunities and had spent countless hours helping her rebuild her repertoire and confidence. As the noise of conversation filled the room, Rita placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. She started with a piece she had been working on for weeks, a challenging Liszt composition that would have intimidated her 6 months ago. Now her fingers danced across the keys with assurance, finding nuances and expressions that made the familiar notes her own. The room gradually quieted as people turned their attention to the music. This was what Rita loved most about these evenings, the way the atmosphere shifted, how a room full of strangers became connected through sound, sharing an experience that transcended words. When she finished the first piece, applause filled the restaurant. Rita acknowledged it with a nod and then began something different, a composition of her own. She had been writing music again, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence. This piece was new, still evolving, but she felt ready to share it. As she played, images from the past 6 months flashed through her mind. The nervous return to the piano that first night, the Vera,